Sign it. Or don't. Either way, get out. The papers hit my chest before I even understood what was happening. White sheets. Black ink. My name spelled perfectly. My marriage reduced to staples and legal language. I looked down. Divorce petition. I'm not exaggerating when I say my knees actually buckled. 2 minutes earlier, I'd been in the kitchen reheating leftover pasta. The house still smelled like garlic and the lemon cleaner I used every Sunday. Our house. The one I helped pay for. The one I painted with my own hands. And now my husband was standing 3 feet away from me, arms crossed, eyes cold, with her behind him. I'm Alyssa Warren, 32 years old, married for 9 years. Or, apparently, formally married, depending on how fast he expected me to process betrayal. She's moving in, he said flatly, nodding toward the woman hovering near the hallway. Tall. Polished. Wearing my robe. So you need to leave. Tonight. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to accept reality. You're joking, I said. This is some sick test, right? He didn't blink. She's pregnant. That word landed harder than the papers. Pregnant. I felt my mouth open, but nothing came out. My ears rang. My heart slammed so loud I thought it might expose me as weak, and I hated that thought more than anything. We tried for years, I whispered. Doctors. Hormones. Tears. And you. Don't, he snapped. Don't make this emotional. Emotional. After 9 years. After miscarriages no one knew about. After nights I held him together when his startup almost failed. You have 1 hour, he said, checking his watch. Take your clothes. Anything else stays. I looked around the living room. The framed photos. The couch I picked. The lamp my mother bought us before she died. You're kicking me out? I asked quietly. He shrugged. You'll survive. You always do. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like glass under pressure. I picked up the papers, folded them once, and smiled. Fine, I said. I'll go. His shoulders relaxed, already victorious. Neither of them noticed my phone in my hand, or that the screen was recording, or that 48 hours later, everything they thought they'd won would be ripped away, legally, publicly, and permanently. Part 2. I didn't cry until the front door closed behind me. Not because I wasn't broken, but because shock is a powerful sedative. It numbs you long enough to survive the first blow. I sat in my car for 11 minutes, engine off, hands locked around the steering wheel. Through the windshield, I could still see the warm glow of the living room lights. My living room. I watched her silhouette move across the window like she already belonged there. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Make sure you're gone before morning. I don't want this to be awkward. I laughed. A sharp, hollow sound. Awkward. That's what he called a raising 9 years. I drove to the only place that felt remotely safe, my best friend Nina's apartment. She didn't ask questions when she opened the door. One look at my face and she just pulled me in, arms tight, steady, grounding. I slept on her couch, fully clothed, divorce papers folded under my bag like a loaded weapon. By morning, the shock wore off, and clarity took its place. I reread the papers slowly this time. Mark had rushed them, sloppy dates, missing disclosures, assets listed vaguely. Too vaguely. As if he assumed I'd be too devastated to notice. That was his first mistake. The second came when I checked our joint account. Almost everything was gone. Savings. Emergency fund. Even the money from my inheritance, the one I'd deposited temporarily when his company needed liquidity. My stomach dropped, but my hands didn't shake. Because suddenly, the last 6 months made sense. The late nights. The secrecy. The way he'd insisted we move certain accounts for tax reasons. The casual gaslighting whenever I questioned him. This wasn't impulsive. It was planned. I opened my laptop and logged into a folder I hadn't touched in years, something my father, a forensic accountant, had drilled into me after my mother died. Always keep copies. Always. Bank statements. Emails. Screenshots. Contracts. I'd saved them out of habit, never imagining I'd need them. But there it was. A pattern. Transfers into a shell LLC under a different name. Payments for an apartment lease that wasn't ours. Prenatal medical bills dated before the night he claimed it just happened. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. I'm so sorry you had to find out like this. I didn't know about you at first. Huh. The mistress. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not with rage this time, but with something sharper. Opportunity. Because if she was reaching out, it meant the story Mark told both of us wasn't holding up. And I had a feeling she wasn't the enemy he wanted me to believe. Part 3. I didn't reply to her right away. That was lesson number 1 my mother taught me before she died. Never answer when you're emotional. Wait until you're strategic. Instead, I opened a new note on my phone and started writing dates, times, lies, every inconsistency I could remember from the last year. The business trips. The sudden password changes. The way Mark had stopped touching me but still kissed my forehead like I was a habit, not a wife. By the time the sun dipped low, the note looked less like grief and more like a case file. Then I replied. What didn't you know? The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, reappeared again. Finally, that he was still married. He said you were separated. That the divorce was already filed months ago. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not relief, confirmation. How far along are you? I asked. A pause. 16 weeks. 16. I did the math automatically. That meant she was already pregnant when Mark and I were still attending couples therapy. When he held my hand and said, I want to fix us. When he cried in my lap and told me he was afraid of losing me. I closed my eyes. Did he tell you why he was divorcing me? I typed. He said you were cold. Career-obsessed. That you didn't want kids and made him feel small. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. I wanted children so badly I'd injected hormones into my stomach until my skin bruised. I'd rearranged my entire career around his ego so he wouldn't feel emasculated. But Mark had always rewritten reality to suit the room he was in. What's your name? I asked. Rachel. I stared at it. Rachel. Not a faceless villain. Not a cartoon mistress. A real woman who'd been lied to, too. I have proof he lied to both of us, I typed. And that has been hiding money illegally. Her response came instantly. I knew something was wrong. He won't let me see his finances. He gets angry when I ask. There it was. The crack. I leaned back against Nina's couch, heart racing, not from fear, but momentum. I'm not asking you to take sides, I wrote carefully. But if you want the truth, and to protect yourself and your baby, you might want to listen. Another pause. Then, what do you need from me? I stared at the words. For the first time since Mark threw those papers at my chest, I felt something shift. I didn't need revenge yet. I needed leverage. And suddenly, the woman he'd replaced me with might become the ally who helped expose everything he'd built on lies. We met in a cafe Mark used to love. That wasn't an accident. Rachel arrived first, sitting stiffly near the window, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. Up close, she looked younger than I expected. Tired. Her confidence, the kind that probably came from believing she was chosen, had cracks in it now. When she saw me, she stood halfway, then stopped. Unsure. Alyssa, she said softly. I didn't know what you'd look like. I almost smiled. Same. We Saturday. Silence stretched between us, heavy but not hostile. I slid my phone across the table and pressed play. Mark's voice filled the space. She's infertile anyway. This is my only chance at a real family. Rachel's face drained of color. That was 2 months ago, I said calmly, while I was still sleeping next to him. Her hands began to shake. I didn't stop there. I showed her the bank records. The shell company. The timeline proving he'd moved money after learning she was pregnant, positioning assets away from both of us. He's planning to disappear once the divorce is finalized, I said. New name. New accounts. You and the baby included, until you're inconvenient. She covered her mouth, tears spilling despite her effort to stay composed. He promised me security, she whispered. A future. He promised me the same thing, I replied. He just uses different words. That was the moment her loyalty cracked completely. What do we do? She asked. I leaned forward. We let him think he's winning. You stay exactly where you are. Smile. Agree. Don't confront him. She nodded slowly. And I, she asked. I document everything, I said. Texts. Calls. Financial conversations. Especially anything about hiding money or rushing the divorce. Her jaw tightened. He's been pressuring me to push him to finalize it fast. Of course he had. Because Mark didn't just want freedom. He wanted control of the narrative. 2 days later, he called me for the first time since kicking me out. I'm being generous, he said, voice smooth. Sign quietly, and I'll give you a small settlement. Enough to start over. I glanced at Rachel's live location on my phone, still at his house. Still listening. Send me the revised offer, I said evenly. I'll have my lawyer review it. He chuckled. You always were dramatic. And there it was. The arrogance. What Mark didn't know, what he couldn't see behind his confidence, was that his mistress, his unborn child, his money, and his reputation were all now standing on the same fragile thread. And in exactly 48 hours, I was going to pull it. Part 5. The next 48 hours moved with surgical precision. Rachel became my eyes and ears. Every time Mark took a call and stepped outside, she recorded audio. Every time he bragged about outsmarting the system, she screenshotted it. When he casually admitted he'd moved funds offshore because judges can't touch what they can't see, she didn't react, just smiled and asked him to repeat himself more slowly. He did. Men like Mark always do. Meanwhile, I met with Elena Brooks, a divorce attorney Nina had quietly vetted for me. She didn't gasp when I told her everything. She didn't pity me either. She listened. Then she smiled. This isn't just divorce, she said, tapping my folder. This is financial fraud. Marital asset concealment. Potential tax evasion. I exhaled for the first time in days. What happens if he realizes? I asked. He won't, Elena said. Because men like your husband believe confidence is protection. That afternoon, Mark emailed me a revised settlement. It was insulting. A lump sum barely covering 6 months of rent. A clause demanding silence. Another requiring I vacate all future claims to his company, one I'd helped stabilize with my own savings. I forwarded it to Elena. Her reply came instantly. Perfect. He just documented intent. That night, Rachel texted me something unexpected. He doesn't know I know, she wrote. But he's scared. He keeps asking if you're the type to get petty. I smiled at my phone. Tell him I'm tired, I replied. Tell him I just want peace. The next morning, I signed nothing. Instead, Elena filed an emergency motion. By noon, Mark's accounts were frozen. Every single one. I wasn't there when it happened, but Rachel described it breathlessly over the phone. He was shouting, she said. Yelling at his banker. Then his lawyer. He kept saying there must be a mistake. There wasn't. Because the filings included evidence Rachel provided, messages proving he'd planned to strip both wife and pregnant partner of financial security. By evening, Mark finally called me. This time, his voice shook. What did you do? He demanded. I leaned back on Nina's couch, calm, steady, unmoved. I survived, I said. You should try it sometime. He started to threaten me. I hung up, because the power had already shifted. And tomorrow, it was going to become public. Part 6. The article went live at 8:07 a.m. I know the exact time because my phone wouldn't stop vibrating, texts stacking on top of each other like falling dominoes. Nina read the headline out loud, eyes wide. Local tech CEO under investigation for marital fraud, asset concealment, and tax evasion. Mark's name. His photo. Our wedding photo. Cropped, but unmistakable. He had built his entire identity on being the ethical success story. Panels. Podcasts. Quotes about integrity and leadership. And now, there it was. Exposed. By 9:30, his company's board announced an internal review. By noon, his biggest investor quietly pulled out. By evening, his LinkedIn profile was gone. Rachel called me from the guest room, my old guest room. He keeps pacing, she whispered. He hasn't stopped sweating. He keeps saying you ruined him. I closed my eyes, not in guilt, but in relief. No, I said softly. He ruined himself. I just told the truth. That afternoon, Elena forwarded me something better than any apology. A court order. Exclusive temporary possession of the house, my house, pending final settlement. Mark was required to vacate within 24 hours. When Rachel told him, the silence on the other end of the line stretched long and hollow. He keeps saying it's your fault, she murmured. That you're vindictive. I smiled faintly. Is he packing? Yes. Good. Rachel didn't stay. She moved out that night, quietly, with 2 suitcases and a new understanding of the man she'd almost tied her life to. I don't want revenge, she told me before leaving. I just want my child safe. So do I replied. The next morning, I walked back into the house Mark had kicked me out of. Same walls. Same photos. Different energy. I opened every window. I boxed up his things neatly, not angrily. No broken plates. No dramatic gestures. Because this wasn't about destruction anymore. It was about reclamation. By sunset, his lawyer called. He's willing to renegotiate, the man said carefully. More fairly. I looked around the living room, sunlight spilling across the floor. I once left in shock. Tell him, I said, we're past negotiation. Because the endgame was already in motion. And Mark hadn't even seen the final move yet. Part 7. Mark showed up uninvited that night. I was standing in the kitchen, my kitchen again, when the doorbell rang. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of ring meant to intimidate. I didn't jump. I checked the camera first. He looked smaller somehow. No suit. No confidence armor. Just a wrinkled jacket and red-rimmed eyes. The man who once threw divorce papers at my chest now stood outside like a stranger begging for relevance. I opened the door but didn't step aside. You can't be here, I said calmly. They took everything, he blurted. My accounts. The board. The investors won't return my calls. I waited. Silence unnerved him more than anger ever did. You set me up, he continued, voice cracking. You used her. You humiliated me. I tilted my head. You mean the consequences of your own actions arrived faster than you expected? He clenched his fists. You always wanted control. There it was, the final rewrite. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, not to protect him, but to protect myself from letting old emotions leak back in. I wanted partnership, I said. You wanted ownership. His mouth opened. Closed. I made you, he snapped weakly. My company, my success, you were nothing before me. I smiled then. Not sharply. Gently. I was something with you, I said. And everything without you. That's when his phone rang. He answered it, confused. I watched his face drain as the caller spoke. Yes, I understand. No, I didn't realize she had. He looked at me, panic blooming. They are reopening the case, he whispered. Criminally. I nodded. Rachel submitted the last recording this morning. The one where you explained how you planned to vanish after the baby was born. He stumbled back a step. You wouldn't, he said. I already did. A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, not for him, not yet, but close enough to rattle the truth into his bones. Please, he said finally. We can fix this. I opened the door and stepped inside. No, I said over my shoulder. You can face it. And for the first time since the night he kicked me out, I felt no anger. Only completion waiting just ahead. The house was quiet after he left. Not the tense quiet of before, when silence meant avoidance, but a deep, settled stillness. The kind that feels earned. I locked the door, leaned my back against it, and slid down to the floor. Not because I was weak, but because my body finally understood the danger had passed. In the weeks that followed, everything resolved the way truth usually does when it's given time. Mark's company officially cut ties. The criminal investigation moved forward quietly but relentlessly. His name stopped appearing in headlines, not because he was cleared, but because relevance evaporated faster than outrage. The divorce finalized without drama. Full financial disclosure. Restitution. The house legally awarded to me. His attempts to negotiate were denied before they ever reached my inbox. Rachel kept her distance, but she sent one final message. Thank you for not turning me into the villain. I replied honestly. You weren't. You were just earlier in the lie than I was. She moved closer to her family. Started fresh. Protected her child. As for me, I reclaimed more than property. I returned to my career on my own terms. Took a role I'd once turned down so Mark wouldn't feel threatened. Traveled. Slept deeply. Laughed without checking the room first. One afternoon, while packing away the last box of his things, I found the original divorce papers, the ones he'd thrown at me. I reread them slowly. Then I fed them through the shredder. Piece by piece. Not angrily. Deliberately. Because the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need witnesses. It's living so well that the person who tried to erase you becomes a footnote in a story that keeps going. Sometimes I think back to that night. The smell of garlic in the kitchen, the sound of paper hitting my chest, the certainty in his voice when he said I'd survive. He was right about one thing. I did survive. Just not in the way he imagined. I didn't disappear. I didn't beg. I didn't break. I walked out with nothing, and came back with everything that mattered. And he has to live knowing it was never his to take in the first place.